The city of Eldridge seemed ordinary at first glance. Quaint streets lined with brick houses, small corner stores, and the occasional park where children laughed and played. To any visitor, it was a place frozen in time, a quiet town that the world had seemingly forgotten. But beneath its calm surface, an invisible thread connected every child who had ever lived there, a thread that no one could explain. It began subtly, almost innocuously. Parents would overhear their children speaking to someone who wasn't there. They would smile, assuming it was nothing more than a typical childhood game. "It's just their imagination," they would say, convinced that these imaginary companions were harmless. But then the stories began to align. One by one, children described the same figure, a friend who visited them every day, who spoke in a gentle, yet oddly commanding voice, whose presence was comforting but, at times, chillingly precise. Parents dismissed coincidences at first. How could every child in an entire city conjure the same companion? Yet, the drawings, the stories, and the details were too specific to ignore. Teachers noticed patterns too. In classrooms, children would talk about going on adventures with someone no one else could see. They described the same tall figure with hollow eyes, a faint, old-fashioned smile, and a habit of appearing in unexpected places. At first, educators chalked it up to imagination, but a lingering unease began to creep in. The turning point came one rainy afternoon when Mrs. Callahan, a local parent, rummaged through her attic looking for old family albums. She stumbled upon a photograph tucked between yellowed papers. The image was faded, almost ghostly. It depicted a group of children from decades earlier, and at the center of the photo stood a figure, strangely familiar, almost identical to the descriptions her own child had given her. A shiver ran down her spine. Something about the figure felt impossibly alive, as if it were looking straight at her through the lens of the past. She called her neighbor, then another parent, then the school principal. Soon, whispers spread through the town like wildfire. Every parent had seen it, the same figure appearing in old photographs, in forgotten newspaper clippings, and in the margins of antique journals. No one could explain it. Was it an elaborate trick, a psychological phenomenon, or something far darker? And if it was, why had it remained hidden for so long? With each revelation, the sense of unease grew. What started as a simple curiosity was quickly transforming into a mystery that seemed to reach beyond generations, beyond logic, and perhaps, beyond reality itself. As the sun set over Eldridge, the children played unaware of the storm of questions gathering around them. But for the adults, one thought lingered like a shadow: if this figure had appeared in the past, and was still somehow present, what did that mean for the children of today? And more importantly, what would happen if they discovered its true purpose? Eldridge was the kind of city where everyone knew each other, yet no one truly knew what lurked beneath the familiar streets. The houses were small but neatly kept, with flower boxes under every window and worn cobblestone paths that echoed with the footsteps of generations. The town square hosted a modest market every Saturday, where neighbors greeted one another with smiles, unaware that an invisible thread ran through their lives, connecting them in ways they could not yet understand. Children filled the streets from morning until dusk, their laughter bouncing off brick walls and iron fences. They rode bicycles along narrow lanes, played hide-and-seek behind hedges, and gathered in the small playground near the school, their voices weaving a chorus of innocent joy. But while the town appeared ordinary, there was an undercurrent of something unusual, something unspoken. Parents would sometimes pause, watching their children, noticing the faraway expressions, the way their little eyes seemed to follow shadows that weren't there. Families were tightly knit, and in Eldridge, secrets had a way of hiding in plain sight. The Callahans, one of the oldest families in the city, were known for their warmth and generosity. Their children, Emily and Jacob, were like any other, curious, bright, and energetic. Yet, they spoke of a friend who appeared in their playroom when no one else was around, describing details that unnervingly matched the figure from the photograph Mrs. Callahan had found. Teachers at the local school began noticing a pattern as well. During story time, children would interject with tales of a visitor they called the friend, speaking with knowledge and understanding beyond their years. The classroom, once filled with typical chatter and scribbled drawings, became a gallery of strange similarities. Every child seemed to sketch the same figure, tall, shadowy, with eyes that held a quiet, knowing gaze. Even their stories, of adventures in empty fields and whispered warnings, echoed across different children, as if they were all recalling memories from a shared past. It wasn't just the children. Older residents of Eldridge sometimes recalled fleeting moments from their own youth, subtle experiences that, at the time, seemed ordinary. A teacher, now in her 50s, remembered drawing a picture of a tall figure beside her bed, the memory of it hauntingly vivid after all these years. Another parent recounted waking to the sound of a whisper calling her name in the middle of the night, a whisper she had dismissed at the time, but now realized was eerily familiar. Visitors to Eldridge noticed the calm, almost idyllic charm, but they never saw what lay behind closed doors. The streets were ordinary, yes, but within homes, in children's bedrooms, and in the pages of old scrapbooks, the city's true story waited, quiet yet insistent. Every child in Eldridge shared a thread of connection invisible to the casual observer, a bond that grew stronger with each passing day, each whispered conversation, each secret drawing. By mid-afternoon, the playground would be emptying, and the golden sunlight would spill over rooftops, casting long shadows down alleyways. That was when the stories grew more unsettling. Children would wander just out of reach of their parents' eyes, speaking softly to the figure that wasn't supposed to exist. They laughed, yet sometimes a shiver would pass through them, their small fingers clutching at nothing. And while adults dismissed these moments, the pattern was undeniable. This was no ordinary imagination, and it was no coincidence that every child seemed to share the same companion. The tension in Eldridge was subtle but pervasive. Parents whispered in kitchen corners, neighbors exchanged wary glances. The city's perfect exterior masked an unseen presence that threaded through generations, one that refused to be ignored. It was as though the town itself held its breath, waiting for someone to uncover what had remained hidden for decades. And then, just as dusk settled over the rooftops and the playground fell silent, a child's voice rang out from the empty swings. "He's coming tonight," Emily said, turning her wide eyes toward the fading light. A chill ran down the spine of anyone who happened to hear it, for in that moment, the invisible thread of Eldridge's secret tightened, pulling everyone toward a revelation no one could yet comprehend. At first, parents laughed it off. "Every child has an imaginary friend," they said, repeating the familiar reassurance that had been offered to generations before them. But the laughter faded when the stories grew too specific, too consistent across ages and families. Emily described her friend as tall and shadowy, with hollow eyes and a faint, old-fashioned smile. Jacob said he could hear the same voice that Emily described, soft but firm, telling him things no one should know. Each child painted the figure with remarkable precision, as if they had seen it before in another life. Psychologists brought in to observe the phenomenon were fascinated, yet perplexed. Childhood imagination typically produced friends of whimsy, bright, playful, and malleable. What Eldridge's children described defied these norms. Their friend exhibited agency. It seemed aware of its surroundings, capable of guiding, warning, and sometimes frightening the children. Parents and teachers noticed a pattern. The friend appeared most often during times of vulnerability, during moments of fear or sadness, as if it existed to offer comfort, but on its own terms, always leaving a lingering unease. Stories began to overlap. One child would recount a game played in the schoolyard, describing the figure climbing the tallest slide and beckoning them to follow. The next child would tell of the same slide, the same game, and the same subtle gestures. Teachers compared notes, and it was impossible to ignore the uncanny similarities. Across the city, children were interacting with something that should not exist, yet existed with remarkable consistency. Drawings became another layer of evidence. Children sketched their friend repeatedly, each detail matching across different families, the elongated fingers, the faint curve of the smile, the hollow eyes that seemed to observe more than just the immediate room. Even more disturbing were the background details, the playgrounds, alleys, and corners of their homes that seemed to shift subtly in each drawing, as if the friend influenced their perception of the world. Psychologists labeled it shared imagination, but no existing theory explained why the visions were identical, persistent, and emotionally potent. The city, its children, and its residents were forever entwined with a presence that defied understanding, challenged reality, and blurred the lines between imagination and history. The figure had endured for decades, shaping the past and present, and in doing so, it left a legacy that was equal parts awe-inspiring and terrifying. Even as the lights dimmed and the city settled into quiet, Emily's final words echoed through the minds of everyone present: "He'll always be here. Watching. Waiting. Guiding. Until we're ready again." The figure's presence lingered in the shadows, a reminder that some mysteries are eternal, some companions are immortal, and some truths are far beyond human comprehension. Eldridge had witnessed centuries of influence, children had encountered a force beyond imagination, and the photograph, faded, yellowed, and haunting, remained a silent testament to a friend that was never truly imaginary. The city's story was far from over, and the figure, patient and eternal, continued to thread its presence through the lives of those who could see, feel, and understand, or at least try to. Some parents reported conversations that chilled them to the bone. One evening, Jacob whispered about a room behind the attic wall, where the friend told him secrets about people he had never met. Emily spoke of the sound of the clock ticking backwards, when she wasn't listening, of a feeling of being watched yet safe at the same time. These anecdotes were often dismissed as fantasy, until they began to intersect with Eldridge's history. Children's words mirrored events, details, and descriptions found in old photographs and documents, things they could not possibly have known. Neighbors started noticing something stranger: the friends would appear even in their absence. A child drawing at the kitchen table would suddenly start talking aloud, describing scenes and conversations that no one had shared with them. Doors creaked open, windows rattled, and in the quietest moments, a whisper, too soft to hear clearly, would float through the rooms. Fear mixed with fascination as parents began recording conversations, documenting drawings, and keeping journals of strange incidents, hoping for an explanation. At night, the phenomenon became more pronounced. Children claimed the friend visited them in dreams, guiding them through long-forgotten streets of the city, pointing to landmarks they had never seen in waking life. Some woke with small marks on their hands or the impression of fingers tracing shapes across their arms. A few mentioned hearing voices speaking of events from decades past, people they had never met, or places that no longer existed. It became clear, this was not a simple imaginary companion. Something, or someone, was reaching across time, imprinting itself on the lives of Eldridge's youngest residents. Despite the mounting evidence, the adults were divided. Some insisted it was a psychological phenomenon, a product of shared trauma or inherited memory. Others feared something darker, an entity or force that had existed long before the current generation of children, one that could not be fully understood. Each parent wrestled with the same terrifying question: was this friend here to protect, or to manipulate? And just when the city thought it had enough stories to explain the phenomenon, a new revelation emerged. A child, sketching in the corner of the classroom, drew a figure that matched the description of the friend, but behind it, barely visible, was a figure from an old photograph unearthed in Mrs. Callahan's attic. The resemblance was unmistakable, too precise to be coincidental. Whispers started among the adults: had the past been living silently among them all along, hidden in plain sight? The tension in Eldridge grew thicker with each passing day. What had begun as innocent childhood play was now an enigma that defied science, reason, and even imagination itself. The figure, the friend, the entity, whatever it truly was no longer confined to whispers. It was leaving traces, markings, and patterns that demanded attention, hinting at secrets the town had long forgotten. And as parents debated and children played, one small voice uttered a line that would haunt them all: "He's been waiting for us to remember." It was a gray, rainy afternoon when Mrs. Callahan decided to clean her attic. The air was thick with dust, and the scent of aged paper hung heavy in the room. She moved carefully, lifting boxes and sifting through forgotten belongings, photographs, and old letters, each item a fragment of the past. It was during this quiet search that she came across a photograph that would change everything. The image was faded, the corners yellowed and frayed. It depicted a group of children standing in a field outside what looked like the old schoolhouse, their faces bright with innocent smiles. But it wasn't the ordinary portrait of schoolchildren that caught her attention, it was the figure standing slightly apart, yet somehow at the center of the image. Tall, shadowy, with hollow eyes and a faint, old-fashioned smile, it matched the descriptions her own children had given her almost perfectly. Her hands trembled as she studied it. There was something alive in that photograph, an unshakable sense that the figure was aware of being observed. The contrast between the joyful children and the eerie presence in the center was jarring. How could she have missed this all these years? She had lived in Eldridge her entire life, yet this photograph, this record of a moment long past, was unknown to everyone she had ever asked. Panic and curiosity surged simultaneously. She immediately called her neighbor, a woman whose daughter also described the same mysterious friend. "You need to see this," Mrs. Callahan whispered into the phone, her voice trembling. Soon, other parents were drawn to the attic, each one leaning closer, eyes widening as they recognized the figure that had haunted their children's conversations. The room seemed to grow smaller, tighter with tension, as though the air itself was charged with the weight of the revelation. Whispers filled the attic. "It looks exactly like Emily's drawings. This is the same figure Jacob described. How is this possible?" No one could offer an explanation. The photograph appeared to confirm what they had been too afraid to believe: this was no ordinary child's fantasy. The city, its children, and its residents were forever entwined with a presence that defied understanding, challenged reality, and blurred the lines between imagination and history. The figure had endured for decades, shaping the past and present, and in doing so, it left a legacy that was equal parts awe-inspiring and terrifying. Even as the lights dimmed and the city settled into quiet, Emily's final words echoed through the minds of everyone present: "He'll always be here. Watching. Waiting. Guiding. Until we're ready again." The figure's presence lingered in the shadows, a reminder that some mysteries are eternal, some companions are immortal, and some truths are far beyond human comprehension. Eldridge had witnessed centuries of influence, children had encountered a force beyond imagination, and the photograph, faded, yellowed, and haunting, remained a silent testament to a friend that was never truly imaginary. The city's story was far from over, and the figure, patient and eternal, continued to thread its presence through the lives of those who could see, feel, and understand, or at least try to. Whatever, or whoever, this figure was, it had been present long before the current generation of children, hidden in plain sight. Some of the parents suggested contacting historians, archivists, or even the local library to trace the origins of the photograph. A search through old city records revealed a surprising truth: the figure had appeared in numerous photographs spanning decades, always standing in the background, seemingly observing, always the same. Yet there was no record of its identity, no mention in newspapers, journals, or municipal archives. The city itself had no memory of this entity. The atmosphere in Eldridge began to change. Children, sensing the adults' unease, spoke more openly of their friend. They began drawing the figure repeatedly, with increasing detail, as though compelled to document it themselves. Parents and teachers compared notes, cross-referencing dates, photographs, and children's recollections. It was as if an invisible hand was guiding them toward understanding, yet deliberately keeping certain truths hidden. The mystery deepened when the town historian, Mr. Hargrove, joined the investigation. He was a quiet man, well respected for his meticulous work in preserving Eldridge's past. Yet even he seemed unsettled as he examined the photograph. "I've seen every school photo in this town for decades," he admitted. "I've catalogued every graduating class, every group picture. And yet, I have no record of this figure. It simply disappears from history, only to appear again years later. It shouldn't exist." Questions multiplied faster than answers. Who, or what, was this figure? Why had it chosen these children, in this city, across generations? And most terrifyingly, was it still present among them, silently observing, waiting for the right moment to act? As parents and teachers stared at the photograph, an uncomfortable thought settled over them. Perhaps the friend was not bound by time in the way humans understood. Perhaps it had always been there, threading through the lives of Eldridge's children, shaping them, influencing them, guiding them, for reasons that no one yet comprehended. And as the rain fell outside, tapping against the attic window like a quiet warning, a child's voice suddenly echoed from the hallway. Emily had been listening quietly, and she said, almost casually, "He's in the photograph because he wants us to see him." The weight of that simple sentence hung over the room, leaving every adult with the chilling realization that the mystery was far from over. Eldridge had always been a city that prized its history. Brick by brick, street by street, it held stories of generations past, of laughter, tragedy, and secrets buried in the archives of time. But the discovery of the photograph sparked a curiosity that had lain dormant, one that began to peel back the layers of the town's seemingly ordinary past. The figure, now recognized across multiple decades, was no longer just an anomaly in children's stories. It had a history, a lineage that seemed impossible yet undeniable. The town historian, Mr. Hargrove, agreed to lead a deeper investigation. He began with the archives of the old schoolhouse, where many of the earliest photographs were stored. Yellowed attendance records, dusty ledgers, and fragile scrapbooks offered fragments of the past. And then, buried beneath decades of documentation, he found references that sent shivers down his spine. Children reported seeing the watcher, the silent friend, or the visitor, descriptions eerily consistent with the figure in the photograph. These entries spanned nearly a century, appearing sporadically yet consistently, always tied to childhood memories of invisible companions. Newspapers from the 1920s and 1930s offered more clues. Small, overlooked columns described unexplained disappearances of children, strange behaviors, and reports of a mysterious figure seen by multiple witnesses. One article from 1932 recounted a child vanishing from the playground, only to reappear days later, speaking of someone who had shown them the world beyond the trees. The details were chillingly familiar, the description of the tall, shadowy figure, the hollow eyes, the faint smile, even the advice given to the children mirrored what current parents were hearing. As Mr. Hargrove delved further, he discovered a pattern. The figure did not appear in every generation, but rather in intervals, emerging when certain conditions in the city aligned, moments of collective vulnerability, fear, or significant change. It was as if the city itself acted as a stage, and the figure as both observer and orchestrator, choosing its moments with meticulous precision. Families whose children had encountered the figure often had ancestors who had experienced similar events, leaving a subtle legacy of unease, curiosity, and unexplainable memories. Old diaries and letters revealed fragments of personal encounters. One entry, dated 1927, was from a woman named Clara Whitmore, who wrote about a friend she could never see but whose voice guided her decisions, protected her from accidents, and sometimes frightened her with cryptic warnings. Clara's writing was meticulous, almost obsessive, describing the figure with exacting detail, the tall frame, the shadowy features, and the eyes that seemed to pierce her very soul. Another letter, from a different branch of the city in 1954, mentioned the figure standing in photographs, always present yet unnoticed, almost blending with the background, a silent observer of the children's world. These historical threads painted a picture both fascinating and horrifying. The figure was not a simple product of imagination, nor was it bound to a single child, family, or decade. It appeared to transcend time, moving invisibly through generations, leaving impressions, guidance, and sometimes fear. Psychologists consulted by the town were baffled. No known mental phenomenon explained why children separated by decades, often without contact, would describe an identical figure with the same habits, gestures, and expressions. The term, collective unconscious, was suggested, but even the most seasoned experts admitted it fell short of explaining the evidence. The pattern suggested more than coincidence. Interviews with elderly residents revealed fragmented memories of their own childhood encounters with the figure, memories they had long dismissed as dreams or imagination. One woman, now in her 70s, recalled climbing the same tree her grandchildren played in today, speaking to a friend she could never touch. She described the voice, the presence, and the feeling of being observed with the same eerie precision as the children of the present. The realization struck hard: the figure had not just persisted through decades, it had a deliberate presence, carefully woven into the fabric of the city itself. The town's municipal records added another layer of mystery. Every few decades, strange entries would appear, reports of minor accidents, sudden disappearances, or unexplained behaviors among children, followed by strangely uniform notes indicating, "no cause found." Archivists noted that these events often coincided with the appearance of the figure, suggesting a connection between the mysterious entity and the town's undocumented history of childhood anomalies. Local folklore began to emerge as well. Eldridge had always carried legends of guardians, spirits, or beings that protected, or haunted, the children of the city. Folktales spoke of a watcher of the young, who moved unseen, shaping destinies, offering guidance, and sometimes exacting subtle punishment. Adults laughed when telling these stories, dismissing them as superstition, yet the photograph and the recurring accounts lent them a disquieting credibility. These tales suggested a presence older than any living memory, an entity whose influence had become embedded in the very identity of Eldridge. The question that haunted everyone was simple yet terrifying: why here? Why this city? Why these children? Mr. Hargrove speculated that Eldridge, due to its size, isolation, and continuity of families, had become a stage uniquely suited for the figure's appearances. The figure had adapted over time, becoming part of the city's collective consciousness, leaving hints, messages, and fragments that would eventually guide observant children, and adults, toward recognition. And yet, despite the evidence, a central mystery remained unsolved: the figure's intentions. Was it benevolent, protective, or manipulative? Did it genuinely care for the children it observed, or was it merely an experiment of some long-forgotten entity, perhaps even something that transcended human understanding? The fragments of history offered no answers, only more questions. Each discovery seemed to illuminate a new layer of the enigma, pulling the town deeper into a web of uncertainty, fear, and fascination. By the end of Mr. Hargrove's investigation, the city's adults were left with a sense of both awe and dread. They understood that the figure was real, not imagined, not a coincidence, but the deeper truth, its purpose, and its ultimate design remained hidden. The children, innocent and unaware, continued to interact with it daily, oblivious to the historical weight it carried. And while adults debated, researched, and theorized, the figure quietly waited, its shadow stretching across decades, pulling threads of Eldridge's history together in a pattern no one could yet fully comprehend. The chapter of the figure's past concluded not with answers, but with a chilling realization: the mystery of Eldridge's invisible friend was far from resolved. The photograph, the diaries, the folklore, all were pieces of a puzzle that demanded attention, yet resisted understanding. And as parents closed the dusty albums and historians locked the fragile archives, a quiet, almost imperceptible movement occurred somewhere in the city. Somewhere, a child whispered to their unseen companion, and the cycle continued, unbroken, as if the figure itself had been waiting for this very moment to reassert its presence. The discovery of the photograph and the unearthing of Eldridge's hidden history left parents both fascinated and terrified. Overnight, the city that had once seemed ordinary transformed into a place of whispers, quiet observations, and sleepless nights. Families began to speak more openly, sharing stories they had long dismissed or feared were imagined. In living rooms, kitchens, and playgrounds, parents recounted encounters their children had described, and in doing so, they began to realize that what they were witnessing could not be explained away. Emily's mother, Mrs. Callahan, was one of the first to break the silence. She described her daughter's interactions with the friend in vivid detail, the whispered advice, the games played with invisible rules, and the way Emily's small hands would trace shapes in the air as though following a form she alone could see. At first, I thought it was just imagination, she admitted, voice trembling, but the drawings, the things she says, it matches the photograph. Every detail. It's like he's real. Jacob's father, Mr. Stanton, shared a similar experience. Jacob told me about a room behind the old wall in our attic. He said the friend showed him pictures of people from long ago, people he couldn't possibly know. When I checked, there were old carvings in the wall, faded and nearly erased, that matched exactly what he described. I can't explain it. None of us can. His hands shook as he spoke, his eyes darting nervously toward the empty hallway, as if expecting the figure to appear at any moment. Children themselves began to articulate their experiences with clarity that both impressed and disturbed adults. They described the friend not just as a companion, but as a guide, a teacher, and at times, a warning. In conversations that were recorded and catalogued by the parents, the children spoke of places and events they could not have known, rooms that no longer existed, names of people long gone, and moments that seemed frozen in time. Their voices were innocent, yet their knowledge was unsettling. The school became a focal point for discussion. Teachers invited small groups of children to speak openly, documenting their words and drawings. It became evident that each child's experience was consistent with the others. Patterns emerged. The friend would appear in moments of fear or loneliness, always offering guidance or instructions that seemed to help, yet sometimes leaving a lingering sense of foreboding. The more the children spoke, the more adults realized that the friend was not just present, it was influencing events in subtle but undeniable ways. Interviews with families revealed emotional layers that were hard to ignore. Some parents were protective, fearful that acknowledging the phenomenon too openly might harm their children. Others were desperate for answers, wanting to understand whether the friend's presence was benevolent or malevolent. A few admitted to feeling guilt for not noticing sooner, for dismissing early signs as childish fantasy. The city was awash with tension, as every household seemed to hold a secret connected to the figure, a private thread linking them to a centuries-old mystery. The children's drawings became almost ritualistic. On paper, the figure emerged repeatedly, tall, shadowy, with hollow eyes and a faint smile, but always with small variations that suggested movement, awareness, and intent. One child depicted the friend standing behind a window, hands reaching toward the glass. Another drew the figure in the corner of a room, observing silently. Teachers and parents noted these subtleties, realizing that the children were not merely reproducing memories, they were interpreting the figure's presence, giving it life through their eyes. One particularly chilling testimony came from a boy named Liam. He recounted waking in the middle of the night, hearing the friend whisper his name, guiding him to the edge of the playground. When he returned to bed, he carried a small, smooth stone in his pocket, one that was not there before. His parents were shaken. How could a child describe actions so accurately, so tangibly, without explanation? And what was the significance of the stone? Some families noticed a shared emotional impact among children. Those who spent more time interacting with the friend became unusually perceptive, sensitive to others' emotions, and eerily aware of details adults might overlook. Others, however, exhibited signs of fear and anxiety, reluctant to speak of encounters and waking in the night from dreams that seemed too vivid, too real. In every case, the friend's influence extended beyond play, embedding itself into the children's perceptions of reality. A few parents reached out to local psychologists, hoping for rational explanations. The professionals suggested collective imagination, inherited memories, or even the influence of suggestive storytelling. But the consistency, depth, and historical connections of the children's experiences defied conventional reasoning. Each account, each drawing, each whispered phrase seemed to corroborate what the photograph had revealed. The figure had persisted across generations, threading itself quietly into the city's life, unnoticed but profoundly present. Even among skeptical adults, a sense of awe began to take hold. One parent admitted, "I don't know what it is, or why it chooses our children, but I feel that it knows things about us we don't even know ourselves. There's a purpose here, something larger than any of us can understand." This acknowledgement, voiced in quiet tones over kitchen tables and in the corners of playgrounds, spread rapidly, binding the community with a shared mixture of fear, fascination, and helpless curiosity. And yet, the mystery continued to deepen. While parents debated, children played, guided by a friend whose intentions were unclear, whose influence was undeniable. Whispers traveled from room to room, stories overlapped, drawings mirrored one another, and parents could no longer ignore the question that had begun to haunt every household: who, or what, was this friend, and what did it want with their children? By the end of the week, the city of Eldridge felt both alive and haunted. Conversations buzzed with details of sightings, experiences, and discoveries, yet no one had answers. The children's voices carried warnings, guidance, and secrets, while the adults struggled to piece together the fragments of history, photographs, and first-hand accounts. And then, during a late afternoon meeting in the school library, Emily spoke again, softly but with clarity. "He told me we have to be ready. He said the photograph is only the beginning." The room went silent. A chill filled the air, a subtle awareness that what they had uncovered was far greater than any of them had imagined. The parents, teachers, and children exchanged nervous glances, realizing that the figure's presence was not just a phenomenon to observe, it was a mystery that demanded engagement, understanding, and, perhaps, action. With mounting evidence and growing unease, Eldridge's parents and teachers realized that casual observation was no longer sufficient. The city's hidden history, the recurring figure, and the children's experiences demanded a formal investigation. Mr. Hargrove, the town historian, agreed to lead a careful examination of records, photographs, and oral histories. Alongside him, a small team of researchers, psychologists, and volunteers began piecing together what had remained obscured for decades. The first step was documentation. Every drawing, every whispered phrase, every story was catalogued. Parents were asked to record interactions between their children and the figure. Teachers collected sketches and classroom notes, noting patterns and anomalies. The process revealed startling consistency. Children across multiple neighborhoods were describing the same figure in the same way: tall, hollow-eyed, smiling faintly, and appearing in moments of emotional vulnerability. These accounts were not scattered, they formed a precise, unsettling pattern. Simultaneously, Mr. Hargrove began scouring Eldridge's archives more thoroughly than ever before. He combed through newspapers, city council records, old diaries, and photographs. Each discovery only deepened the mystery. The figure appeared in images spanning generations, standing silently in the background, unnoticed by adults but perfectly clear to children. In some cases, children from decades past had drawn or written about it in diaries, matching the current generation's accounts with eerie precision. The investigators felt as though time itself was bending around the figure, linking decades with invisible threads. As the investigation progressed, interviews with children became increasingly revealing. Some described the figure guiding them to hidden places, pointing out objects or locations long forgotten. One child mentioned a locked drawer in the old library containing a bundle of letters dating back nearly a century, letters that, when discovered, confirmed details the child could not have known. Others spoke of quiet warnings: a hallway to avoid, a street corner to be cautious of, or a small gesture that foretold something about to happen. The investigators documented each account meticulously, recognizing that the figure was shaping experiences with deliberate precision. The psychological dimension of the investigation was particularly compelling. Experts noted that while imagination often produces variations, Eldridge's children were reporting nearly identical details, gestures, phrases, and even subtle emotions. The friend was not merely present, it was consistent, coherent, and almost purposeful. Dr. Elise Carpenter, a child psychologist assisting the team, remarked, "I have never encountered anything like this. Children are naturally imaginative, but this goes beyond imagination. There is pattern, intent, and an uncanny awareness that defies our understanding of development and cognition." The team began to map appearances geographically, tracing the figure's influence across neighborhoods, schools, and parks. Patterns emerged. The friend appeared most frequently in areas linked to the city's oldest families, spaces that had been the site of previous unexplained incidents, and locations tied to old photographs and documents. Eldridge's landscape itself seemed to act as a conduit, a stage upon which the figure's presence manifested. Investigators began hypothesizing that the city had, in some way, become entwined with the figure, as though its streets and buildings were deliberately chosen to channel its influence across generations. Archival photographs provided another layer of intrigue. Some images captured subtle details previously unnoticed: a shadow in the corner of a playground, a figure standing behind children during school events, or faint outlines resembling the friend lurking at the edge of a field. When cross-referenced with children's accounts, these details became undeniable. The figure was real, persistent, and invisible to adults, choosing to manifest only in ways that left traces in the memories of children. One breakthrough occurred when the team uncovered a set of letters written by a teacher from the 1940s, describing a watcher who appeared to guide children in secret. The letters included drawings matching those seen in current children's sketches. The teacher noted a sense of urgency. The watcher seemed to be transmitting knowledge across time, but the reason remained unknown. The letters warned of patterns repeating, urging the preservation of evidence in case the phenomenon resurfaced in future generations. This discovery added weight to the idea that the figure's presence was deliberate, cyclical, and perhaps even aware of the investigators themselves. The investigation also revealed a psychological divide among adults. Some embraced the mystery, meticulously recording, questioning, and theorizing. Others recoiled, afraid to acknowledge what their children were experiencing. Tension grew within the community, as skepticism clashed with undeniable evidence. Yet even the most doubtful adults could not ignore the phenomenon when children provided accurate, detailed accounts of objects, people, and events they had no way of knowing. Fear, fascination, and frustration intertwined, creating a charged atmosphere that mirrored the children's own mix of wonder and anxiety. Field investigations added yet another dimension. Researchers accompanied children to the playgrounds, schools, and streets described in their stories. They observed interactions closely, noting subtle behaviors: a child pausing to listen to an empty corner, fingers tracing shapes in the air, or eyes following something invisible. In one instance, a child led investigators to a small, forgotten alcove behind the library, describing a detail that exactly matched a photograph from the 1930s, an act that was impossible without the guidance of the figure. Each discovery intensified the sense that the friend's influence was deliberate, precise, and omnipresent. The investigation reached a chilling turning point when a new photograph surfaced, taken decades earlier and previously overlooked in the archives. The figure stood, as always, in the background, but this time, a faint, almost imperceptible inscription appeared in the corner of the image. Mr. Hargrove deciphered it with difficulty: "Remember them." The cryptic message suggested intent, a conscious awareness that the figure's actions were observed, documented, and meaningful. The team realized that the mystery was not just historical, it was interactive, dynamic, and demanding engagement from those who sought to understand it. By the end of the month, the city of Eldridge had transformed from a quiet, ordinary town into a place alive with investigation, documentation, and cautious observation. Parents, children, teachers, and researchers were united by a shared pursuit: to understand the figure, to uncover its history, and to anticipate its next appearance. And yet, for all the discoveries, photographs, and patterns, one chilling truth remained: the friend was always one step ahead. It appeared where it wanted, influenced events silently, and left questions far more numerous than answers. And then, one evening, as investigators gathered in the dimly lit archives, a small voice cut through the silence. Emily whispered from the corner, "He said we're ready now. He's going to show us." The room froze. Every adult felt the weight of the words, a mix of awe and terror. The investigation had begun, but the figure had been watching all along, waiting for the moment to escalate, to reveal more of its secrets, and to draw the town into a mystery that was far from ordinary. The investigation, which had begun as careful documentation and observation, suddenly spiraled into something far more unsettling. The evidence collected over weeks, photographs, drawings, diaries, and first-hand accounts, revealed patterns that defied logic, reality, and reason. What had seemed like a local curiosity was quickly morphing into a phenomenon that no one in Eldridge could ignore. Every discovery led to another, and the investigators realized they were approaching a truth more shocking than anyone had imagined. It began with cross-referencing photographs spanning nearly a century. Mr. Hargrove noticed a disturbing detail: the figure was not just appearing randomly, it was positioned consistently near children whose families had long histories in Eldridge. The figure's placement in the background of images, often overlooked by adults at the time, now seemed deliberate. Its gaze, always directed toward the children, suggested awareness, intention, and perhaps an understanding of events unfolding decades before the current generation existed. Then came the diaries. Old journals from children in the 1920s, 1940s, and 1960s described encounters identical to those being reported today. One entry from 1943 described a figure who whispered guidance during moments of fear, leaving instructions that later aligned with historical events the child could not have known. A diary from 1967 recounted a figure pointing out hidden details in the schoolyard, warning of accidents and missteps, shaping the child's choices in ways only understood years later. The pattern was undeniable: the figure was influencing lives across time. A breakthrough occurred when Emily, guided by an instinct she couldn't explain, led investigators to the old library's basement. There, hidden behind a false panel, they discovered a cache of letters, journals, and photographs spanning generations. Each item depicted the same figure, always in the background, always observing. But there was something more: subtle annotations, cryptic symbols, and markings that suggested the figure's presence had been studied or documented by someone, or something, long ago. Whoever had left these records had anticipated future generations noticing, preparing a trail of evidence like breadcrumbs through time. The investigators were stunned. The figure's history was far more complex than they could have imagined. It was not a simple entity or a ghost of collective imagination, it was interacting with the city across decades, leaving physical traces and emotional imprints. Children were not merely imagining it, they were perceiving something real, something with purpose and intent. The revelation forced a chilling question into the minds of every adult present: if the figure had guided, warned, and influenced children for generations, what was its ultimate goal? Even more unsettling were the accounts of the children themselves. As the investigation intensified, they began revealing details that adults could not have predicted. Emily described the figure leading her to locations that did not exist in maps, pointing to places erased from memory or records. Jacob spoke of instructions about people he had never met, but whose fates were inexplicably tied to his own. The children's words painted a picture of a being that moved beyond time, interacting with both past and present in ways that defied understanding. Then came the photographs with subtle, cryptic changes. A photo from 1932 showed the figure standing in the background, but the faint outline of what looked like a hand pointing appeared, previously unnoticed. Another image from 1951 revealed a shadow shaped like an arrow, directing attention to a forgotten playground corner. The investigators realized that the figure's presence wasn't passive, it was communicating, leaving hidden instructions and signs for those perceptive enough to see. One particularly chilling discovery involved a photograph of a group of children from the 1970s. The figure appeared as always, but this time, its eyes seemed almost alive, almost human, staring directly into the camera. Parents who viewed the photograph felt an overwhelming sense of being watched, as though the figure's gaze had followed them across time. The realization was terrifying: the figure was not confined to influencing children alone. Its presence could extend beyond the immediate, affecting anyone who came into contact with its traces. The team also uncovered evidence that the figure's influence might be cyclical. Patterns indicated that every few decades, there was an uptick in reports, photographs, and documented encounters. It was as though the figure waited, calculating the perfect moment to manifest, ensuring its guidance, or manipulation, was delivered at precisely the right time. Some researchers speculated that the figure could be linked to an unknown force, one that had existed long before Eldridge was founded, one that used children as conduits to affect the world in ways adults could not perceive. A shocking connection emerged when Mr. Hargrove examined the city's municipal archives. Records of accidental incidents, sudden disappearances, and unexplained behaviors in children coincided with the figure's appearances. In nearly every case, the children reported seeing the friend shortly before these events occurred, often following instructions or guidance given by the figure. While no harm had been documented in recent years, historical records suggested that its influence could be far more potent, and potentially dangerous, than anyone realized. The psychological implications were profound. Dr. Elise Carpenter noted that the figure's consistent influence on children suggested a form of intelligence or consciousness beyond current understanding. "We are witnessing something extraordinary," she said, voice tight with awe. "It is neither fully supernatural nor entirely explainable by psychology. It operates in a realm that intersects perception, history, and perhaps something we cannot yet name. Its intentions are unknown, but its actions are deliberate." The most unnerving revelation, however, came from Emily herself. She claimed that the figure had shown her a vision of the city decades ago, warning of events that would shape Eldridge's present. The vision included locations of hidden objects, unseen pathways, and instructions for adults to uncover. Emily's description perfectly matched a map found in the library archives, a map that had been overlooked for decades. The investigators were forced to confront the chilling reality: the figure's presence was not random. It was orchestrating events, guiding actions, and embedding knowledge across time with a purpose no one could yet comprehend. As the team pieced together the evidence, a grim pattern became clear. The figure had always been part of Eldridge's history, influencing children in subtle and powerful ways. Its actions were deliberate, its presence undeniable, and its intentions, though still a mystery, suggested a force operating far beyond human comprehension. The photograph that started the investigation was not merely a clue, it was a message, a harbinger of deeper truths, and perhaps a warning of what was yet to come. By the end of this stage of the investigation, the city was in a state of collective awe and fear. Parents, teachers, and researchers were united by the chilling recognition that Eldridge had been touched by something extraordinary, something that moved invisibly through generations. Children continued to interact with the figure, unaware of the historical weight they carried, while adults grappled with questions that had no clear answers. Was the figure guiding them? Protecting them? Testing them? Or was it something far more enigmatic and potentially dangerous? And then, late one evening, as investigators reviewed photographs in the dim light of the archive, Emily spoke again, softly but with piercing clarity. "He wants us to see everything. He said it's time for us to know the truth." The room fell silent. The weight of her words settled over everyone present, heavy and undeniable. The investigation had revealed astonishing evidence, patterns across decades, and the deliberate presence of a mysterious figure. But it had also raised a terrifying realization: the figure was far from finished, and its next moves would be even more profound, and perhaps, irreversible. As the investigation deepened, the city of Eldridge felt an unsettling shift. The evidence collected, the children's testimonies, and the historical documents painted a story that defied logic and reason. What had once been whispers of imagination had transformed into an undeniable, almost tangible presence. The figure, once dismissed as an imaginary companion, had revealed itself as something far more complex, a force that spanned decades, manipulated events, and influenced generations. The team of investigators, historians, and psychologists worked tirelessly, piecing together fragments from across the city's history. Every photograph, every diary entry, and every child's account became a thread in a tapestry that, when viewed as a whole, was both beautiful and terrifying. The figure's appearances, its deliberate positioning, and the subtle guidance it offered suggested intelligence, consciousness, and purpose. But understanding that purpose proved elusive. It was Dr. Elise Carpenter who first noticed a startling pattern in the children's drawings and testimonies. She observed that the figure's gestures, the paths it led children along, and the locations it highlighted corresponded with historical anomalies, events that had been documented but never fully explained. Disappearances, sudden accidents, and inexplicable knowledge were not random, they followed a design. The figure was orchestrating influence over time, nudging children toward awareness, discovery, and perhaps even warning. The discovery of hidden artifacts throughout Eldridge added another layer to the mystery. Letters, objects, and old toys were found precisely where children had described, often in locations that adults had forgotten or overlooked. One journal, belonging to a teacher from the 1930s, described an object, a small carved figurine, that appeared in a child's possession without explanation. When found decades later, the figurine matched the description perfectly, suggesting that the figure's influence had left tangible markers, bridges between generations. Even more chilling were the children's visions. Emily described seeing the city not as it was, but as it had been decades ago, with invisible pathways and hidden rooms that did not exist in the present. She spoke of events unfolding before her eyes, of choices made by long-gone children, and of guidance that had shaped the lives of those who had come before. The investigators, watching and documenting, realized that the figure was imparting knowledge across time, creating a connection between past, present, and future that humans had never experienced before. A particularly shocking revelation emerged when the team compared the photographs spanning decades. The figure's form remained consistent, yet subtle changes suggested adaptation. Its posture, gaze, and positioning seemed to communicate messages that only children could decipher. Sometimes it appeared in shadows, at other times more clearly, but always observing, always guiding. Historians speculated that the figure was both a witness and an actor in the city's history, influencing events without leaving traces that adults could perceive. Psychologists were both fascinated and unsettled. Dr. Carpenter noted that the figure's repeated influence on children could have profound implications for understanding cognition, perception, and perhaps even collective consciousness. The consistency of the children's experiences, combined with the historical evidence, suggested that the figure had an ability to reach across generations in ways that science could not explain. Yet the question remained, why Eldridge? Why these children? Why now? The pattern of interaction became more apparent as the investigation progressed. Children described specific instructions, small tasks, warnings, or actions that would prevent accidents, reveal hidden items, or point to historical artifacts. These instructions often led investigators to previously undiscovered evidence, reinforcing the figure's role as both guide and observer. It was as if the figure had been preparing the city for a revelation, layering knowledge and clues over decades to ensure that certain truths would eventually come to light. Then came a discovery that shook the team to its core. In the archives, a series of photographs from the 1920s depicted the figure standing near a group of children, but this time, it held an object, a small envelope, almost invisible to the naked eye. When digitally enhanced, the envelope revealed a handwritten note with a single, cryptic instruction: prepare them. The message suggested forethought, planning, and deliberate interaction with the city's children, reinforcing the terrifying notion that the figure had long-term objectives that extended far beyond mere presence. Even more startling were the interviews with older residents who remembered their own childhood encounters. One man recounted seeing a shadowy figure at the edge of the playground, whispering advice that later altered his decisions. Another described a toy left in his room with no explanation, one that matched the descriptions given by children decades later. These accounts were not isolated, they formed a continuous chain of interaction, bridging the past with the present, creating a legacy of influence that no one could fully comprehend. The investigators began theorizing about the figure's nature. Was it a guardian, a manipulator, or something beyond human understanding? Could it be a supernatural entity, a psychic imprint, or a consciousness that existed outside of linear time? No single theory satisfied all the evidence, but one realization became clear: the figure had been orchestrating events in Eldridge for generations, preparing the city, its children, and its adults for a purpose that was only beginning to reveal itself. Tension in the city grew as awareness spread. Parents and teachers became hypervigilant, documenting every interaction, every drawing, every whispered phrase. The children's behavior, once dismissed as imagination, was now studied as a form of communication. And yet, the figure remained elusive, always one step ahead, revealing only what it wanted, guiding only those it chose, leaving a trail of questions far heavier than answers. The unraveling truth was a double-edged revelation. On one hand, the figure was undeniably real, with a history that spanned decades, leaving tangible evidence and shaping the lives of children across generations. On the other hand, its ultimate purpose, motives, and limits were unknown. The city had been part of a subtle, ongoing orchestration, a living experiment, or perhaps a grand design that humans were only beginning to perceive. Every clue uncovered led to new questions, and every answer revealed layers of complexity that defied understanding. And then, in a quiet moment in the archives, Emily spoke again, her voice steady but imbued with a weight beyond her years. "He said we have to see it all. Everything. The beginning, the middle, the end. He said it's time." The investigators froze, realizing that the figure's influence was moving toward culmination. The photographs, the diaries, the drawings, the whispers, all had been preparation. The city of Eldridge, its children, and its adults were on the precipice of uncovering a truth that would change everything they thought they knew. As the room went silent, a faint movement in the corner of the archive caught everyone's attention, a shadow, tall and indistinct, just at the edge of vision, almost human, almost alive. It was there, and yet it was not. A chilling reminder that the figure had always been present, always observing, and always orchestrating events with a precision that humans could barely grasp. The unraveling truth was clear: Eldridge had been touched by a force beyond comprehension, a presence that moved across generations, influenced children, left clues, and prepared the city for a revelation only it understood. And now, as investigators, parents, and children collectively faced the figure's impending disclosure, one realization hung over them all: nothing would ever be the same again. The city of Eldridge had transformed. What began as quiet curiosity had become a collective awareness of something ancient, enigmatic, and profoundly unsettling. The figure, once dismissed as a child's imaginary friend, had revealed itself as an entity that transcended generations, a presence that wove itself into the very fabric of the city. Parents, children, historians, and psychologists alike were left grappling with evidence that challenged every assumption about reality, perception, and the passage of time. Emily, Jacob, and the other children continued to interact with the friend, guided by instincts and subtle instructions. Their voices, once innocent and casual, now carried a weight of understanding and urgency. They described experiences that were increasingly vivid, moments that blurred the lines between memory, vision, and reality. The investigators documented every interaction, noting the precision, consistency, and intelligence evident in the friend's actions. The children were no longer merely witnesses, they were participants in something far larger than themselves. Parents, too, had changed. Sleep was often disrupted by fleeting visions of shadowy figures or whispered phrases, a reminder that the friend's presence extended beyond the children's interactions. Some felt awe, others fear, and many felt both simultaneously. Families spoke in hushed tones about glimpses of the figure in hallways, in the corner of rooms, or just at the edge of vision, reinforcing the chilling realization that it was always observing, always aware, and perhaps even judging. The investigators pieced together the accumulated evidence one last time, seeking to understand the figure's intentions. The historical patterns, photographs, diaries, letters, and children's testimonies suggested a purpose beyond simple companionship. It was influencing events, guiding children, and embedding knowledge across time, but toward what end? Scholars and psychologists could only speculate. Was it protective, experimental, or manipulative? Or was its purpose something entirely beyond human comprehension? A breakthrough came when Emily led the team to a previously undiscovered portion of the old library's basement. Behind a hidden wall, a room preserved with meticulous care revealed artifacts, journals, and photographs that spanned nearly a century. Each item was carefully arranged, almost ritualistic in its placement, as though the figure had curated its own archive, leaving evidence specifically for those capable of noticing. The presence was deliberate, intelligent, and hauntingly meticulous. Among the artifacts was a photograph unlike any other. The figure, tall and hollow-eyed as always, stood directly at the center, almost emerging from the image itself. Surrounding it were generations of children, each engaged with the figure in ways that suggested guidance, observation, and influence. At the bottom of the photograph, barely legible, was a phrase, "They are ready." It was the first explicit message that conveyed intent, leaving the adults and children alike with a chilling sense of both anticipation and dread. Emily's voice broke the silence. "He says we're ready to understand everything." Her words carried clarity, certainty, and a strange serenity, despite the fear they invoked. The room seemed to shift, heavy with unspoken understanding. Every person present felt the weight of generations converging in that moment. The figure was no longer just a companion or observer, it was a force that had shaped the city, influenced choices, and connected lives in ways no human had orchestrated. Yet even in this revelation, questions remained. Why Eldridge? Why these children? Why now? The investigators recognized that while patterns could be mapped, intentions could not. The figure's intelligence, strategy, and timing were beyond comprehension. Its ultimate purpose remained a mystery, one that humans might never fully understand. It was clear, however, that the figure had always been present for a reason, guiding, observing, and shaping events toward an outcome that was only partially visible to the mortal eye. The city itself seemed to respond to the collective realization. Streets felt quieter, shadows longer, and the familiar landmarks took on a strange, almost sentient quality. Children played with renewed awareness, guided subtly by the friend, while parents moved through the city with a cautious reverence, observing and noting every detail. Eldridge had become a living chronicle, a space where past, present, and future converged under the quiet influence of an unseen, enduring presence. In the final hours of the investigation, a subtle pattern emerged in the children's drawings. Lines, shapes, and forms previously overlooked now coalesced into a map of Eldridge itself, an overlay connecting historical sites, hidden rooms, and objects of significance. It was as if the figure had been guiding them to understand the city, not merely as a physical space, but as a repository of memory, knowledge, and influence. The children, unknowingly, were decoding its message, participating in a narrative that spanned generations. The investigation concluded not with answers, but with awareness. Eldridge had been touched by something extraordinary, something beyond ordinary perception. The figure remained a part of the city, an enduring presence whose intentions were still enigmatic, whose influence persisted across time. Adults and children alike were left with the haunting understanding that the city's history, their lives, and the events unfolding around them had been, in subtle and profound ways, shaped by this entity. As night fell over Eldridge, the city seemed to exhale a quiet, lingering tension. Shadows lengthened in empty streets, the wind carried whispers through the trees, and the attic where the photograph had first been discovered felt impossibly alive. The figure was present, as always, watching, guiding, and waiting. And somewhere, in the mind of a child, it whispered once more, carrying a promise that the story was far from over. The haunting truth remained, Eldridge would never be the same. The city, its children, and its residents were forever entwined with a presence that defied understanding, challenged reality, and blurred the lines between imagination and history. The figure had endured for decades, shaping the past and present, and in doing so, it left a legacy that was equal parts awe-inspiring and terrifying. Even as the lights dimmed and the city settled into quiet, Emily's final words echoed through the minds of everyone present, "He'll always be here. Watching. Waiting. Guiding. Until we're ready again." The figure's presence lingered in the shadows, a reminder that some mysteries are eternal, some companions are immortal, and some truths are far beyond human comprehension. Eldridge had witnessed centuries of influence, children had encountered a force beyond imagination, and the photograph, faded, yellowed, and haunting, remained a silent testament to a friend that was never truly imaginary. The city's story was far from over, and the figure, patient and eternal, continued to thread its presence through the lives of those who could see, feel, and understand, or at least try to.